Chapter 75. Lorelei had returned home, of course, after spending a long time encouraging everybody else. She had known in her heart for a long time just how futile their efforts would be, for once you've seen how many realities there were, and are, and shall be, it is impossible to replace the veil so lifted. She had returned home, and it was a place of ruin, and death. If her magic hadn't turned the poisonously oxygenated air into a breathable atmosphere that smelled of fresh lace, she'd have died not long after she had come back. Everyone was dead, of course. Where they hadn't been burnt to piles of cinder that collapsed as she wheeled past them, they had fallen to the ground, skin strangely preserved by the new atmosphere. It was oddly peaceful, too, and once she had stopped crying, and fought off the many waves of nausea, she took a long time to explore past the boundaries of the yards. Of course, she had buried people, first. It took a lot of time, and wasn't always possible, but time didn't really pass in this fragment anymore. The outside was much larger than she had imagined. Larger than the island, larger than maybe the world beyond it, she couldn't say for certain. There had definitely been a lot of beautiful things out there once, violently red cherry trees and blue and yellow flowers, and gentle rivers. She could see the memory of them, even if they wouldn't live in this place anymore.
So. I'm sorry you've had to see this, but then again, such is the burden of those who dream. I do not regret that you have taken your last journeys. Harumph. Your short-shaved friend is quite terse. I do not care for her.
Mildred offered pleasantly, having appeared next to her with no real proclamation. Lorelei sighed, wishing just for a moment that her hair could stay controlled and corralled and cool. But she didn't feel cool right now, or collected, or certain. This was what she was to return to.
Magic is awful,
Lorelei whispered, and Mildred nodded sympathetically.
Many things are, magic is just predicated around awfulness. And wonder, too, you should not forget what pleasantries it may offer, and that those are the best parts of it. But to see the world for all its terrible beauty.
Both were silent, then Lorelei muttered,
That, then, is the true heart of magic.
And the two witches laughed, or perhaps cackled. Hers could use some work, but she might try to get the hang of it in time.
Anyway, Mildred. I don't think I can accept that. So, I'm sorry, but I'm going to try to fix everything. Can I just say though, that you've been a fantastic teacher? I realize it might not mean much in the hundreds of years to come. On the contrary, kindling. It shall mean everything.
And Mildred smiled. Just a little.
But I can't accept that the world is doomed to destroy itself, and that I need to abandon my friends to die. I don't care if they're humans or demi-humans or whatever. If this the worst humanity has to offer, then I want to fight for the best of it.
The smile died, and Mildred caved in a little on herself, and the atmosphere that would no longer permit a single human life, any normal human or beast or plant that might breathe, grew thick and ashen around them.
So it is, then. A foolish decision, but I imagined it from a fool such as you. No, I respect you all the more for it, but it is the nature of witches to come to blows over foolish things. I would have had tea with you before this, but so it is, and so it shall be.
Mildred straightened her own hat, and it obscured her cunning eyes, no longer mischievous or amused at all. No mirth danced there, no happiness nor smug smirking energy, only the shade of a long-lived woman who had seen situations like this. Perhaps many times, before.
Ah, forgive my late arrival. You see, Grendolf. No one cares that you can't even defeat one half-dead hero. If you're going to complain, do it later. Your humiliation is unimportant. You tried to protect them in your manner, and now you shall have a second chance.
Mildred's snapping tone coincided with the crisp click of magic as she hovered slightly above a corroded husk of a building made, once of, prefabricated metal. It might have been a bunker, or a house, or a school. Lorelei could neither remember nor say.
You would do well not to disrespect that hero, witch. You would do well not to disrespect either of them.
And Grendolf's hiss was as serpentine as the writhing serpent of his staff, but he complied with her words all the same. Lorelei's eyes flickered back and forth between the both of them, waiting for something that she hoped would never come. Brass hums. It isn't well known, but if you loop your fingers around it, there's a faint unmistakable metal noise, a little like the whistle of a bell that's been traced round the edges. Or the sharpening of a knife.
Friends, friends. You really shouldn't be so mean to each other. I mean, if we fell to infighting now, there'd be no climatic final battle, right? Right. And who'd want that?
Zemiel had appeared between them, wide smile stretched from ear to ear on his face. His hands, thin hands, gentle hands, slid around either of their shoulders, and it was all too easy not to notice the circlet he had been toying with. It didn't really look like the sort of thing he'd wear. If anything, it looked a little like it might have belonged to someone else, once, long ago.
So, are you the mastermind, Zemiel? Did you show Leo and me that world so I'd just give up? Was that it? I don't understand.
Lorelei shouted, but it had no effect on the three magi, not the effects she wanted, at least. Grendolf had shrugged off whatever damages he had taken earlier and was carefully avoiding looking at anything. Mildred was chuckling softly, and in a dangerous and unpleasant tone that Lorelei had forgot she had. Zemiel was, despite everything, whirling his hands in the air, after having thrown the small crown into a pile of trash over his shoulder, and looking embarrassed.
No, geez, no. Wow, why does everyone seem to think I'm the villain? I'm not, at least, not right now. I mean, hey. These two just wouldn't fit in polite society though, would they? Me, I set some things in motion. That's all. You might go so far as to say I'm the hero.
And he laughed as if this were some little chat between old friends, but his eyes were the color of cut glass.
Heroes don't give up. Heroes don't decide, oh, well, we failed before, better stop trying. Heroes don't. They don't tell Paul shitty lies about moon bases. That wasn't a lie, there's probably a moon base up there.
Shut
up.
And the whole lot of them went quiet, save Mildred, who was still laughing. After all, she had known this side of Lorelei for a long, long time.
I can't believe you shitty excuses for magic users could each have such kindnesses and just go oh, whoop-de-doo. We'll drink tea all day, and not care about anything ever. You know what? You don't deserve to drink the tea out of cups stained with dentist snot.
Well, okay, they were giggling now and that hadn't really been the intent. Fighting off embarrassment, Lorelei continued, because she was still angry, so angry that she couldn't really insult people, sure. But that had never really been what she wanted to do anyway.
Grendolf. Ruslana grew to trust you, and after trying to chain up the dragons so the world stays in place, you just packed up and called it a day. Have you ever, in any of your hundreds of years of unlife, tried talking to them? Of course. Do not presume. I shall presume, because I have the right to speak before we fight. You haven't. Haven't even tried to understand why Dragunov is so sad, and so angry. Why Lazarus just sleeps beneath the earth, and only gets riled up when his toxicity builds up to a fever point. You just repeat the same mistakes, time and again.
Grendolf was not done, but she was. Moving her shaking finger to Zemiel, who had been trying to stifle his own cruel laughter towards the skeletal mage, Lorelei spoke again. For a moment.
Honestly, I'm not sure what you've done that's good. Sorry.
Zemiel dropped out of the air into the trash pile he had thrown the tiny crown into. She thought she could hear sobbing.
But I think you've actually been pretty nice to people when you're not being a creepy loser, so keep that up. Because you know what? Nasty plots and rumors don't make you cool, or intelligent. They make you the sort of person people pretend to like, just like you pretend to like them. And one day, they'll forget about you, and you won't know the reason why.
The trash stopped wobbling, and she wasn't sure why she had said what she said, but Zemiel had gone silent, dead silent. The air was suddenly very thick, almost choking. Mildred had stopped laughing and was staring down at her, eyes still hidden by her wide-brimmed hat.
Well then, child. I suppose you have something to say to me. No. Only that I will never respect anyone who just gives up, no matter how realistic or pragmatic it's supposed to be. I would expect nothing less of my pupil. Well, then.
And in a flicker of distant lights, the three mages were at each other's side once more. Lorelei glanced up into the sky, and beyond them the dead lights of space gave way to a brilliant aurora that not once would have been visible beyond the choking smog and electric lights of the yards. She was the closest thing to a pure human here, and perhaps the first and last that might see it. Then their magics were woven, and without any rules nor limitations to hold them back, there was no chance she had. Turning around in a wheelchair wasn't that difficult for her, but it wasn't exactly the stuff spoke of in tales of legendary evasion. Beams of light in multiple shades of cold blue eviscerated the field around her, stinging to the touch but doing no real damage, and above them were choking smogs that none of her magic could purify, which split into lanterns of green serpents, which then spat out even more fog, which spit into yet more snakes. Finally, beautiful yellow lancets of light pried themselves from the earth and exploded into spherical shapes, dancing around the dead city and disintegrating whatever they touched. She had known from the beginning she had no chance. But this was ridiculous. And it occurred to her they were just showing off, and that made her even more. Her fingers clutched white-hot to the sides of her wheelchair as she failed yet another dodge, tripped up not by magic but by an errant jagged shard of metal, or perhaps bone. Knocked from her wheelchair to the ground, Lorelei winced and tried to right herself, but even as strong as she was, and as powerful as her magic had grown. No. This wasn't over, not even yet. Ruslan was counting on her, probably wondering where she was, if it hadn't been mere seconds since she left. And that meant Zhao was, too, and Bones, and Zembi. Gritting her teeth and ignoring the strange empty feeling that she didn't want to dwell on, Lorelei pulled herself right side up and frowned into the sky, where three spheres of laughing light shone untouchable amongst the aurora. Untouchable, perhaps, to her. Right now. Lorelei concentrated, trying to remember the place she had seen not so long ago. It was a distant place, and beautiful, and made her feel less afraid, even as the choking smog around her found a hold and clung to her hair, and her lungs, and roaring through the breach of stars, Dragunov slammed into Zemiel so quickly that the mage only had a moment to blink in dull surprise before another opening appeared in the distant horizon, swallowing them both in a red second. Amazingly, she could still hiss surprised, "Kai-a-a-a," even as the opening in the void closed. The magics of Grendolf and Mildred had both ceased. Both were staring down at her, up at them. And Lorelei couldn't help but smile. Just a little.
Thanks, Dragunov. Hey. I think this is a little more fair.
Her whisper turned into a shout as she climbed back into her wheelchair, facing the sky in defiance. Lorelei plucked a few particularly shiny stars from the sky and spun them around in her fingers until they were white-hot and shiny. They whispered calmingly before she let them run wild and free, and their soft light exploded into the broken night, dispelling it instantly. Around the three of them, the ground disintegrated by a field of light. Mildred had begun muttering sulphurously and preparing another spell, but it was cut off by a familiar trailing aa as Zemiel fall downward, still chased by Dragunov.
For pity's sake! How did you manage to take over a kingdom like this, useless usurper? Blind luck.
Despite the claw marks and blunt trauma, His answer, a hazily raised thumbs up, was never anything but cheerful, and perhaps that was Samuel's strongest magic.
I'm actually good with surrendering right now. I mean, it was fun, but I didn't sign up for this level of physical activity. Haha, oh ow ow.
But as Samuel raised his head and somewhat uneasily sank back into a fighting stance, it was clear that as much as his own internal groove had been disrupted, he was still thinking of spells to unleash upon her, them. For, with the beating of great and feathery wings, Dragunov settled down beside her, all of his gleaming eyes directed towards the still shaky wizard in obvious resentment.
Now that I have tasted wakefulness, I would not return to a time where my dreams were not of my own choosing. And neither will I be referred to as a mere shade of my old foe. Do you know of the story of the sky and the earth?
Samuel opened his mouth to answer. That was the last she saw of him as the gleaming spear of light engulfed him, obliterating the cheerful wizard in his entirety. Of course, entirety is only a short amount of time for a magician, and Dragunov roared his challenge to whatever dimension he had retreated to, charging towards it and letting neither void nor magic bar his path.
He had the right idea. Surrender. Please.
Lorelei whispered as Dragunov disappeared, but both Mildred and Grendolf had learned from their hesitance, and were already preparing a bevy of magics, each. And unlike before they worked in tandem here, the poisonous, vile magics of old swamps and forgotten miasmas mixing with the vilest curses of universes rent asunder in the pursuit of ancient knowledge and power. Ignoring them both, Lorelei rolled herself up a friendly shooting star that deigned to serve as a walkway, coming to a rest so that they were all floating above the billowy beige clouds below. Grendolf kept shooting her nervous looks, but to be honest.
Dennis, do you have any bright ideas? I'm not really sure I want to fight right now.
Of course, since it was her time of need, the Dark Lord didn't answer. He was probably safe in some demonic bunker with an arsenal of body pillows and cheese crunchets. Somehow, the thought filled her with inner strength, and Lorelei smiled as her hat reappeared on her head with a gentle twinkle of magic. Rays of sunlight filtered up from beneath the clouds, even though that made little sense. They danced beneath her feet and whispered secrets up to her, and Lorelei listened carefully before replying. Then the sun burst through the clouds below, just in time to block a cavalcade of thrown serpents the same shape as javelins, their long fangs coated with 1,000 different venoms each capable of killing even deathless foes in the blink of a moment. Grendolf could not blink, of course, but it must have been some time since magic had blocked magic, for he hesitated. And Lorelei leapt upon it. Whistling, she beckoned to the clouds around them with a wave of her hand, and they swarmed Grendolf as one entity, bursting into an explosion of bone-chilling rain and lightning. It had no effect but to make him miserable, but that had been her goal, and it was doubly pleasant to see Mildred curse under her breath, cancelling her most ancient and terrifying spell to turn the harmless inclement weather into a gentle, if somewhat foul-scented breeze from the mire. Then, both the Lich's terrifying red hand and the pallid green arm of her teacher raised in unison, and ancient reptilian creatures with unpronounceable names tore themselves from the depths beyond time. Without legs nor eyes had they slept in dead bogs and deep earth, waiting to be awakened to devour worlds, and upon the distant fluting call, so had they come to serve. And they flew towards her, springing through cloud as if they were rivers in a deep cavern, and suddenly they were. Sorcerers and serpents plunged downwards through the flashing void as it reassembled itself into churning pit, overgrown with vast and beautiful mushrooms, the spores of which grew thick and clung to the air. Lorelei easily blocked the first thrown towards her, but their broods had grown large in the deep and forgotten places, and they came from all sides, each more terrifying than the last and twice as hard to block, since there were no stars visible down here. Finally, she missed. And the grey coatl cast itself towards her, before being utterly incinerated.
Whoa, seems I arrived just in time. I hate caverns. Awful places, no civilization for those of refinement, such as ourselves. Might I intrude?
Leopold had found a new cane, and given the fuzzy green trimming, it had probably been bought at an exorbitant price from Mr. Mammon. Apparently he didn't even give discounts to friends. Or warnings about aesthetic. Or maybe that was Leopold's actual taste.
Thanks for the support. Just copy what I do, and keep us shielded. I've got a villainous plan.
His response was to roll his eyes as if he could not believe a young woman such as herself could ever have a plan approaching villainy. While doing just that. And his magic was crude, and weak, and absolutely of the weakest substance. But he was very good at copying others, and despite the ferocious pace of Grendolf's casting, not a single serpent made it close to them without being dispelled back into the dream stuff it came from. Lorelei traced the rip in reality Leopold had followed her through. It was still recent, and quite shoddily done. He must have been encouraged to follow her. Right. With a devil-may-care grin, Lorelei thrust her hand at Grendolf, and laughed as unpleasantly as she possibly could. It was actually pretty impressive, not really a cackle, but close enough. Pulling down her hat to mirror Mildred's, she ran her fingers across her throat.
You just got boned.
It was the first thought that came to her mind, and even as she said it, she could hear the pained wincing from Leopold, from Grendolf, and from, no, Mildred was laughing, for sharing horrible taste and humor was the mark of true magic, possibly. Grendolf had already recovered and began casting a new spell as the black hole opened up behind him, drawing the ancient arch-lich inside of it. It was rudimentary too, and in any other circumstance it would have been easy enough for him to dodge, but the combination of horrible puns and the suddenness caught him off guard, pulling him inside with a whistle of something that sounded like wind. The lich awoke in the now featureless air of the island. And though the devolution rent the ruins of his soul asunder, he had come this far. Turning over the reins now would be tantamount to letting countless worlds die. Spells of return flew to his mind, and he began to cast indiscriminately, pulling energy from wherever he could find it. Particles of air, wisps from blown flowers, the huge being flying towards him bearing a cargo of 3 tinier figures.
It seems it's our destiny to fight again. En garde.
No. No, it couldn't be. The spell dropped from the incline of his mouth, and as much as it was possible, Grendolf sagged. Calimere was standing on a very bemused Lazarus snout. She had no sword. Not even a branch. She was just raising her fist to the air, and cheering. The dragon muttered something through teeth clenched so tightly that not a hint of noxious vapor could escape. The well-bandaged man laying back against his side replied lazily, and suddenly, Grendolf began to wonder. What if they had been wrong? Had hope been so close, without it ever seeming so? And unable to shake this new feeling, the great skeletal mage decided that this once, no matter what might happen, perhaps.
Lorelei, you've become quite strong.
Mildred had watched the excitement on the faces of her former pupil and that aggravatingly arrogant man with some degree of pride. She was not a teacher, nor interested in others, not often. But it had felt pleasant to fight for a little bit, even if she had held back. Hope, however, hope was a dangerous thing. Like trust, it made you wish for futures that would not come, and no matter how much you might desire something, even in magic that is rarely enough to make it so. Leopold was saying something to her, but with a sneer and a blink of her eyes, the foolish hedge wizard was cast into an endless dimension of swampy vistas and luminescent horizons. It was not a place for aught such as he, but it would hold him, well enough. And now they were alone. The caverns faded around them, and the light faded around them, and Lorelei and Mildred were in the void, together. Lorelei, of course, had not once really sought to fight, and Mildred had no intention of killing her star student. But if it were the fate of the world, there really was no other option, was there?
But you must understand this. Strength and charity will only take you so far, in life. Eventually you shall meet a problem you cannot fix through optimism or kindness. Do you truly feel you can just challenge it with brute force, alone?
Around them, the world exploded into a distant reflection of what it might have been, long, long ago. Beautiful flowers taller than the tallest human stretched into the horizon, in every shape and color the mind could imagine, and more, besides. The shaking of the breeze around them was gentle, and the weather, pleasant.
I do.
Lorelei yelled back, and the wind blew around her, shaking flowers to and fro. Mildred chuckled, shaking her head, but Lorelei wasn't done.
And when I fail, when I can't find the strength to move any further, when nothing I do will work, when nothing I do might matter, I'll have my friends to rely on, too. So, I might fail, and I might not know what to do, but I'll never be alone, not truly. And neither will you.
The wind picked up, and the flowers shook and laughed, and Mildred stared at her. Perhaps she was stunned. Or perhaps she was angry. Still further, in the way only an old witch might be, perhaps she was very happy, indeed. The flowers sifted around them, casting off petals into the air which drifted into pretty baubles of color and light, and Mildred watched them pass. What future would she shape, then?
Are you worried about the world?
Lorelei asked, rolling over to her side. Mildred shook her head in reply, the long strands of matted black hair trembling as she did.
Of course not. Do not be foolish, not after your precious fought victory. If you take something such as this, you should be confident, elsewise, those that see you might wonder why you fought in the first place.
And they were both silent, for a while.
A little, however. Not for our sake, even amongst the non-magic folk, it isn't such a terrible thing to be reborn. And I shall give you a little advice, foolish as it is, an ending is merely a mark against a well-worn and much-beloved book, torn asunder.
Mildred chortled, quietly.
One day, you find the rest of the book, and to your surprise it is even more wonderful than you anticipated. Or not, but the story continues, either way. And so it is, and so it always shall be. Well, metaphors and all that aside, don't worry about us, either. I promise to look after everyone. It'll suck to lose all this, though. Humph. Maybe you won't. Stranger things have happened.
Mildred plucked a flower and stared at it. Before she could say anything else, Lorelei plucked a small, red flower, and placed it against her hat. Mildred permitted herself a smile, if only for this moment.
Regardless, the bonds you create stay with you, I think. I was able to get those two to work with me to try to fix things here, and none of us truly likes one another. Or perhaps we do. I cannot say. How odd.
Lorelei, however, had went white as a sheet, her hands gripping into the armrests of her wheelchair in a cold fury.
Oh gosh. I never told Dragunov not to, eat Zemiel or whatever dragons do. Oh no. Pish. Don't worry in so much. That man could survive a million horrific accidents, though I'm not sure why they keep seeking him out. He's a friendly sort, after all.
They both laughed again, and Mildred played with the flower against her hat. It faded, as magic does, but she liked the mental image. Maybe some other day, she might duplicate it, for her own amusement, or perhaps for the sake of a cherished memory.
I suppose, then, it's time for farewells. Shall we meet again, in a place that is real, or close enough to it? Yes. I suppose we shall.
Lorelei paused, fidgeted with her hat, no longer a pale imitation of Mildred's, but weighed down by ocean glass and an astrolabe, and maybe a few too many pretty flowers that Mildred continued to pile on top of it with an increasingly amused smirk, and then rolled over to her. Slowly, the young woman embraced the short, old witch, and said nothing at all. Then, she pulled back, wiped the tears from her eyes and waved. Chapter end.